Yo, what is up, y'all? It's Cone back here again tonight with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. There continues to be a lot of blowouts just between replacement players and a lot of health and safety protocol issues. A lot of teams are just severely undermanned, and so we get a lot of really weird games, which kind of makes it hard to make these recap videos at times. But I did find some games that I think were pretty interesting and some fun things to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and get into that. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe, continuing the daily upload streak throughout December. We're almost there to the end. Thank you all for supporting throughout that. And if you want to be a part of it for the last few days, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Also, comment down below what your favorite moment was from tonight's games. So, the first game I do want to talk about is the Boston Celtics versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Celtics have been a team that I've been meaning to talk about for a little bit because they've got some big issues. But first, let's focus on the team that won this game in the Minnesota Timberwolves. They won 108 to 103, and they were severely undermanned in this one, as I mentioned. Health and safety protocols, COVID issues, kind of just ravaging a bunch of teams. The Timberwolves were without their big three in Cat, D'Lo, and Anthony Edwards, so not a game that many people expected them to win, and they pulled it out with a starting lineup of Jordan McLaughlin, Malik Beasley, Nathan Knight, Josh Okogie, and Jaden McDaniels, who all had pretty solid games. Specifically, you had a great game from Nathan Knight, who had 20 and 11. Jalen Noel had 29, 6 and 3 off the bench. Greg Monroe, who got signed like 36 hours ago, or something like that, had 11, 9, and 6 in this one. He's been out of the league for like 4 years. He suited up after being signed yesterday, and he balled out. They asked him after the game about Jalen Noel's career high, and he said, good for him, but honestly, I didn't know who he was before today. So, yeah, pretty good game from a guy who had no idea who his teammates were coming into the night. So shout out to Greg Monroe. And when you kind of look at it that way, it's even worse that the Celtics came in and lost this game. Now, they do have their own issues. Jason Tatum, Dennis Schroeder, Marcus Smart didn't play in this one amongst other guys. But their roster, they still had Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, Rob Williams, Peyton Pritchard had a solid game. This is one that the Celtics should have won. They should have. And that's kind of become a theme with the Boston Celtics. There are so many games this season where I look at it and go, the Celtics should have won this one. Or that the Celtics should just be better. Because when you look at even when they're all fully healthy, when you look at their roster on paper, they should be so much better than they are. Dennis Schroeder, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, Rob Williams. Grant Williams has been pretty solid so far this season too. Peyton Pritchard is a solid backup point guard. Like, you've got decent pieces on this roster, and they're just not being put together. This doesn't feel like a team that should be as bad as they are. Now, have they had issues with COVID? Yes, 100%. This is a Celtics team that's really struggled with COVID and injuries over the course of the last 1.5 seasons. But even still, when they're fully healthy, this team just doesn't win. And even in games like this, where even though they're undermanned, they should probably win this game, they fall apart. And it just doesn't work out well. It's hard to watch them play because they have an offense that is it reminds me so much of the Oklahoma City Thunder teams with KD, Ross, where I would watch the two of them ISO back and forth. Now, we had a lot of success with that at times, but it kind of held us back from maybe our true potential as a roster. And so watching this, it's tough to watch. When Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are healthy, it feels like those two kind of just ISO a lot of the time. This team feels like it needs a better point guard to facilitate. It's kind of an issue you run into sometimes when you have two really solid wings and that aren't really good facilitators. No, when they're handling the ball, their playmaking isn't really there. Jaylen Brown this season has more turnovers than assists, which is not good for a guy who's supposed to be one of your main ball handlers. When we take a look at kind of their roster, it's clear that moves need to be made. While it looks okay on paper, it's just not working. The problem is, when you kind of look at the guys that they have, there's really not a lot of great moves that they can make. Their best pieces are maybe like Schroeder, Marcus Smart, and Rob Williams. What's that going to get you? I don't think that can get you any huge difference makers. Maybe you could trade Jaylen Brown. In fact, at this point, I think everyone but Jason Tatum should probably be available. I'm not saying they trade Jaylen Brown or that they should just dump him off or anything, but if maybe like a star comes up, maybe the Celtics, or not the Celtics, the Trailblazers are like, Damian Lillard is now available for trade, you should hop on the phone immediately and offer them Jaylen Brown. 100%. You have to switch something up, because I've been a long-time defender of the Jason Tatum Jaylen Brown duo, and I still think they are a great duo, and there is a way to make it work. I'm just not quite sure. I think the roster construction needs to be different around them, and I'm not quite sure if they have the pieces to maneuver right now to make that roster work the way it needs to work. So you should consider it. I'm not saying you trade him for just anything, you trade him, you start rebuilding. I'm not saying all that. But if some superstar becomes available, don't be shy and offer up a Jaylen Brown. They don't really have a clear direction, kind of the way that they're going. You can trade Jaylen Brown, but like I said, unless like a guy like Damian Lillard becomes available, there's not really many pieces that you're going to be able to get that really truly help you elevate past when you're already at with Jaylen Brown right now. There's no way they trade Jason Tatum, nor do I think that they should. Even if Jason Tatum has had kind of a down year, especially efficiency wise, he's still a phenomenal player and a guy that I think could be an MVP in the future. You don't trade a guy like that. They're not going to trade him. Thankfully, I haven't seen people going too crazy on my timeline and saying that Jason Tatum needs to get traded. But, maybe we're a couple more Celtics losses from that happening. They don't really have a lot of young assets either. Romeo Langford, he was like I think he was a minus 35 or 32 even in a 5-point loss tonight, which is ridiculous. So he's not great. Peyton Pritchard is solid. As I mentioned, he had a pretty solid game tonight, even if he shot inefficiently. All around, pretty decent game for a guy that was asked to step up big time tonight, play 45 minutes. He's solid, but he's not anything like super great. Aaron Nesmith is solid. I like his long-term potential as a solid 3-and-D role player, but maybe nothing more than that. So they've got like a couple solid young pieces, but outside of like Jaylen Brown and Rob Williams, who's pretty interesting, they don't really have anything that moves the needle that much for a trade. Right now, it kind of feels like they're just sinking and they're trying to keep patching holes up. I think a big move is coming for the Boston Celtics. I get a feeling that Brad Stevens is looking at this team after having coached it for a while and now seeing it through the lens of a GM. I'm thinking he's looking at this team and he's thinking to himself, something needs to happen. So I think Dennis Schroeder will get traded by the deadline. I wouldn't be surprised if Marcus Smart got traded, and I wouldn't be surprised if even more guys on this roster get traded. No one should be untouchable outside of Jason Tatum. Jaylen Brown, probably mostly untouchable unless a great trade comes up. But you have to consider all options for the Celtics team that continues to disappoint. They've made the Eastern Conference Finals a couple times with this duo. I know they can make it work, but how do they make this team work? It just feels like really they need a better point guard. They need someone who can facilitate, create plays for others. They don't have that, and for right now, they're kind of just sinking. Next, I want to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies and the Phoenix Suns. I think you might get a full video on the Grizzlies tomorrow, so if you want to see that, let me know in the comment section below. That might be my video for tomorrow because the Grizzlies are playing really, really well. They beat the Phoenix Suns tonight, 114-113. Desmond Bane had a 29-point game. He is one of the best players in terms of improvement from last season. I don't know why I just didn't say that he's one of the most improved players. He is. John Morant, 33, 4 and 4, 11 from Jaren Jackson Jr., yeah, that was kind of just it. 13 and 16 with 7 assists from Steven Adams, who had a really solid game in this one. They're kind of proving me wrong. I thought they would regress this past season, and they have not regressed at all this season. For the Phoenix Suns, you had Chris Paul, who had 13, 6 and 13. Not a great game though, efficiency-wise. 30 from Devin Booker, 15 from Jalen Smith, who played solid off the bench. No DeAndre Ayton in this one, which really did hurt the Suns. But even still, I'm sure this is one they probably wanted to win. Also, no Jay Crowder. Shout out to the Grizzlies for coming into Phoenix. Even without DeAndre Ayton and Jay Crowder, this is a very tough Phoenix Suns team, especially to come into Phoenix and beat them. This is a big win for the Memphis Grizzlies. They're 21-14. They continue to rise, and they're fighting as one of the youngest teams in the NBA for home court advantage in the playoffs right now. It's pretty impressive. Next, I want to talk about the Brooklyn Nets versus the Los Angeles Clippers. James Harden looks like he's back, at least through these last 2 games. He had a 36-point triple-double last game, and tonight he had 39, 8 rebounds, 15 assists. He was dominant. He looked like the James Harden we've seen in the past, hitting step-back jumpers, getting to the free throw line only a few times. I think it was only 4 times in this game, and despite that, he looked quick. He was facilitating super well. He was making all the right decisions. I tweeted out that he looked like he had kind of found his rhythm, and there were some people asking if I thought it was because there was no Kevin Durant. I don't think that's the case. James Harden, yes, I think he needs to be more aggressive when KD is on the floor, and even when Kyrie comes back, potentially as a part-time point guard. I think they need him to continue to stay aggressive like this. When James Harden plays like this, alongside a guy like Kevin Durant, they're going to be very tough to stop. Those 2 guys, especially James Harden, he's so good as a scorer and a facilitator that he can be aggressive enough and still get KD his shots. I think James Harden needs to kind of be more aggressive. He needs to enter this scoring mode more. And if he's able to do that, if he's able to keep up his rhythm, he's already been like not great in terms of James Harden standards. That is, he's been a solid NBA player all season. But in terms of James Harden standards, he hasn't been as good as he's been in the past over the course of the year. And the Nets are still doing well. They're the 1 seed right now. So if James Harden continues to find his rhythm like this, and he's putting up like 30-point triple doubles every night, the Nets get even scarier. So I think he needs to continue to stay aggressive, but even without Kevin Durant, it's not just the fact that he's getting more shots and more touches. It's the fact that he looks quicker. He took like a 2-week rest with COVID, and he looks quicker now. He looks more comfortable, and it looks like he's finding his rhythm again. That's important. This Kevin Durant absence could be huge for the Nets down the line if James Harden is able to find that rhythm, find that aggressiveness, and kind of just that play style that he's always had, and get re-comfortable with it. If he's able to do that, I think this Nets team ceiling gets even higher, and their ceiling already was a championship, but they could be even better of a team if James Harden continues to play like this. We all know he's capable of it. It's just a question of if he will. And I think these couple games to build up his confidence, reestablish himself kind of in that role, is going to be huge for the Nets down the line, especially if James Harden is able to kind of keep this going. You had 18 from Nick Claxton in this one, 18 from Patty Mills, who has been one of the best signings of the offseason, 12 from DeAndre Bembry, 12 from Blake Griffin. This was just a big win for the Nets, blowing out the Clippers, who are without Paul George. And the Clippers are in trouble because they've got a really, really tough schedule coming up. And without Paul George, it's only getting tougher. You had like Marcus Morris score 24, 15 for Eric Bledsoe, 10 for Luke Kennard, 15 from Keon Johnson in 17 minutes, which is a pretty good game for him. But if we take a look at the Clippers schedule coming up, the Clippers have the Celtics, who we just talked about, who are kind of struggling, but it is tomorrow on the second night of or it's only like a 1-game difference, and without Paul George, nothing is guaranteed. Then they've got the Raptors, who play tough. They've got the Nets again, the Timberwolves, the Suns, the Grizzlies, the Hawks, the Nuggets. It's a tough schedule coming up. They've got a tough next like couple weeks or so, and so the Clippers, this could be a really rough stretch for them. And as a Thunder fan who we have their first round pick, that's exciting, but for Clippers fans, that's probably very worrying, because the goal, of course, is to get to the playoffs, have Paul George be as healthy as possible, and maybe get Kawhi Leonard back, try and go in a late season run. But if you go through this stretch without Paul George, you lose a ton of games and you continue to drop down the standings, there may not even be a playoffs. I'm assuming they'll probably still make the play-in, but there may not be a playoffs to even go towards with that whole Kawhi Leonard thing. So this is going to be a very critical stretch for the Clippers. It's going to be interesting to see how their role players really step up. And yeah, I think it'll be fun to kind of observe and see how it goes. So those are my thoughts on some of the games and the teams that played tonight. Let me know what your thoughts were in the comment section below. I appreciate y'all watching. I will see you all later. Real one, say it back.